Reasonable Doubt is a group exhibition that looks at the raw reality and tangible effects of technical systems and the justice or injustice inherent in social systems. The group exhibition Reasonable Doubt questions the inherent degree of justice of social structures, out of an urgent awareness of the consequences and shortcomings implicit in the term equality. It offers a critical reading of the foundations on which our society is organised, both socially and infrastructurally, and shows how a number of fundamental ideas have their biased effects. It addresses the day-to-day outcomes of concepts such as equality and neutrality within systems of justice, technology, and access to public space and facilities. The exhibition focuses on a number of excesses that play an active role in all parts of society: political scandals, educational assessment mechanisms, and technical systems, whose inbuilt prejudices lead to horrific consequences. It looks at the contrast between the truth that algorithms purport to facilitate and the often problematic outcomes of their predictions. The foreground of progress veils the inherently biased rationale at these activities' core, while intrinsic advantages and disadvantages determine the eventual consequences. It is essential to know for whom and by whom technical systems are developed. If they eventually produce what they were designed for, the effects of their bias will have programmed negative effects on those who were not taken into consideration during the design process. In Reasonable Doubt, links are drawn or redrawn between these motives and elaborations. Technology, in the broadest sense, is literally a means that is observed and examined as a way of scrutinizing designed social structures and facilitating technologies. The contributing artists look critically at the architecture and digital infrastructure used to observe, control, and facilitate contemporary existence. On the one hand, the exhibition looks at these systems' raw reality and tangible effectuation, and on the other hand, it provides space for subversive adaptations of these technologies and devotes attention to other perspectives and possibilities in a critical, productive way, all considered with reasonable doubt.
Hi, my name is Vincent van Velsen. Together with Florian and Weigl, I curate the show Reasonable Doubt here at V2 Lab for the Unstable Media. As part of the conversation series, Every Difference is Created, Hannah Dawn Henderson will give a talk on her work Annotations on Afrikaanderwijk, which is part of the exhibition.
Annotations on Afrikaanderwijk entails a series of photographs shot in a neighborhood located in the south of Rotterdam. Back in 2019, I was invited by Het Gemeen op Zout, a cultural centre located in the heart of Afrikaanderwijk, to examine the neighborhood's past and present. Before even visiting the city's archives or looking at the kind of statistical data that one can typically find on public online databases, what really stood out to me is how, just through walking through Afrikaanderwijk, one can readily encounter signs, symbols, and current actions that are essentially a testament to a chronology of cultural, economical, and more broadly political shifts and turns in not only the city of Rotterdam, but also on a national and international level. These are signs that are embedded in the neighbourhood's landscape, laid as a kind of sedimentary strata, and as such they can appear quite mundane in nature. In our day-to-day lives, we don't typically ponder at any great length why a street is named as it is, or why a shop carries a certain name, and even where public monuments are concerned, we can very quickly accept such imagery as simply being part of the backdrop of our environment. In this project, I wish to excavate and interrogate the narrative threads that these signs point towards. In what ways can histories be memorialized, that is to say, acknowledged, recorded, archived in public space? Which angle of history is sanctioned by the municipal authority, and which historical events go without such memorialization? Through looking at historical events, I also wish to offer a critical analysis of the neighbourhood's present-day situation, namely the upheaval that Afrikaanderwijk's residents have and continue to face in response to the municipality's long-term redevelopment scheme. So there are three key events that the work addresses. The first is the creation of the neighbourhood and the naming of its streets. Built at the turn of the last century, Afrikaanderwijk was constructed to house workers of the local harbour, and as such it was designated from the outset of its creation to be a working class neighbourhood. It is one of many neighbourhoods throughout the country that makes reference to the Netherlands' colonial relation to what is today the Republic of South Africa, with the street names referring to figures such as Paul Kruger, formerly a state president of Transvaal, and Martinus Steyn, a former president of the Orange Free State. It is important to note that Rotterdam's Afrikaanderwijk was built concurrent to the Second Boer War, and so these street names can be read as a reflection of the nation's wish to extend a sentiment of support to the Boers, descendants of Dutch and French Huguenot colonizers. Meanwhile, the war, which lasted around 2.5 years, would see the deaths of around 12,000 native Africans, 25,000 Afrikaners and 22,000 British. Now, fast forward 7 decades later, and the social demography of the Netherlands is rapidly changing. You will remember that I just mentioned that Afrikaanderwijk was designated as a working class area. It is also for this reason that by the early 1970s, it became one of the first neighbourhoods in the Netherlands to have a majority population comprised of residents of recent migrant heritage. In the decades following the Second World War, the Netherlands government signed a series of international labour accords, actively promoting the recruitment of workers from states such as Turkey and Morocco, amongst others. These workers would be known as gastarbeiders, literally guest workers, a term that points towards the expectation that these workers would only remain in the Netherlands for as long as they served their purpose, namely facilitating the country's economy. Now, the idea of a working body being essentially designated as an importable commodity is hardly a new economic concept. In fact, historically the Netherlands was already pretty familiar with that practice. However, the arrival of these so-named gastarbeiders was the first time when such a paradigm was so extensively applied and visible within the borders of the nation, and not in a distant land unseen by the majority of the Netherlands' population. As the population density of Afrikaanderwijk began to rapidly increase and the demand for housing became desperate, opportunistic landlords exploited the situation by over-renting poorly maintained properties well beyond their capacity. This resulted in deteriorated living conditions. Further, the gastarbeiders faced discrimination from their fellow workers and residents, who perceived them as being culturally incompatible and a threat to the livelihood of the Dutch working class. Underpinned by economic precarity, these racial tensions climaxed in 1972 in the form of a riot that took place over 3 days. This saw gastarbeiders physically dragged from their homes and their properties vandalized. The response of Rotterdam's municipality to this riot was to legislate a policy limiting the percentage of residents of a migrant background that can be housed in any single neighbourhood. The rationale was that such a policy would limit the risk of ghettoization. However, the policy also seems to fall into the trope of characterising migrants as posing an inherent threat. Today, across the whole country, we are facing another housing crisis, and we are also seeing a change in how different sectors of the city are valued. In the past, suburban homes are much sought after, largely because they are away from the city centre. However, in our current age, where fast access to commercial outlets is highly valued, it is now the urban centre that is viewed as desirable. Afrikaanderwijk isn't exactly central, but it's also not periphery either. New private residential developments in the neighbourhood are set to retail at over €500,000. Now, bear in mind that the average annual income of a resident in Afrikaanderwijk was calculated last year at just slightly over €16,500, making it one of the lowest earning neighbourhoods in Rotterdam. And in fact, around 82% of the neighbourhood's current residential buildings are regulated as social housing. Back in 2005, the municipality of Rotterdam was the first in the Netherlands to introduce the Special Measures for Urban Problems Act, commonly referred to as the Rotterdam Wet. The Act pertains to neighbourhoods whereby 45% of households are low income, and 25% of residents are unemployed. It enables municipal authorities to enforce an income threshold for prospective residents, and the neighbourhood is thus designated as a consent zone or opportunity zone. 11 years later, in 2016, the municipality announced its Woonvisie for 2030, or Inhabitants Plan, an extensive urban restructuring scheme. The plan will result in the demolition of a significant portion of Afrikaanderwijk's social houses, and while the plan also foresees the construction of new social housing, much fewer houses will be available, and the income threshold required in order to qualify as a potential tenant will be markedly higher. Since the announcement of the plan, Afrikaanderwijk has begun to undergo demographic changes. Residents' attempt to halt demolition plans in the sub-district of Tweebosbuurt led to legal proceedings in 2019. Though these court hearings initially resulted in delays in the demolition schedule and also drew international attention to the case, the court eventually ruled in favour of the housing corporation. In mid-2021, a team of 5 reporters from the United Nations issued the following statements to Rotterdam's Municipal Council. The involvement of the municipality in the hasty implementation of a controversial project in Tweebosbuurt aimed at the demolition of 535 social rental homes may violate the human right to suitable housing. Nearly an entire neighbourhood is about to be destroyed, not so much because of problems with the houses themselves, but allegedly because of financial benefit to the concerned housing association, which has serious financial concerns from risky investments in the past. This demolition undoubtedly affects disadvantaged migrants and people with a migrant background, contributing to their social vulnerability and their risk of homelessness." End of quote. So, in the eyes of housing corporations, the municipal council, and other stakeholders, it is clear what factors define the ideal resident. The investment value of a citizen is speculatively determined by a matrix of factors which both draw upon but also affect the citizen's long-term educational, housing and health prospects. Ethnic background is a prime determinant in this algorithm, as such categorization potentially situates the individual on a projected trajectory that sees their access to social mobility and security significantly curtailed.